Hi, this is Steve. You're watching ESFO. With this episode, I wanted to do a reaction to a video posted a week ago by Rick Beato. I don't know if you know him. Rick has been a long time. He has a very popular YouTube channel where he interviews musicians and goes over, top 10 bass lines of all time, this sort of thing. And anyway, so he was actually responding to a video he had watched, his own reaction video. So this is another reaction to the reaction, whereby a British, an academic or someone was on a podcast and explaining how the number of bands on the charts has almost disappeared. And by this they mean, official groups, not duos, not solo artists with another cameo from another solo artist, actual, consistent Coldplay, Foo Fighters, stuff like that. And Beato did his own test to see if this also panned out on the United States charts, assuming he's using Billboard, but he also uses Spotify's metrics as far as most streamed artists and things of this nature. Anyway, check a little bit of it out right here.
So next, as an experiment, I put together a list of the top 400 artists in ranking of monthly listeners on Spotify, and I looked to see how many bands on there were created in the last 10 years. Take a guess how many. You might think, 25 bands, something like that, in the top 400. Has to be a lot, right? It's actually only 3. Only 3 bands in the top 400 artists on Spotify have formed within the last 10 years.
So the first thing to note, and this isn't, I don't think, meant to be misleading by either video, but there are still lots of bands. The bands have not gone anywhere. They're not on the charts, true, at least they're not the Hot 100 by Billboard, but if you go to my Instagram page where I review a song every day, you definitely find bands. A band like Chicago's Brigitte Calls Me Baby, for instance. Anyway, so that's point number 1. Point number 2 is that this, looking at the number of weeks spent on the charts by a given artist or type of artist, whether hip-hop, whether a rapper or a solo artist like Taylor Swift or whoever else, is somewhat cloudy and inconsistent because, as they go back 70s, 80s, whatever else they do, 90s, early 2000s, the metrics for measuring the top places on the charts have almost never been consistent. For one, early on in rock history and periodically, time and again, you had the pay-to-play sort of illegal payola scandals and things like that, where the things that ended up being played were not there of their own merits, but of money from the record industry or distributors or whoever else. 2, in the past, up until the SoundScan era, which is early 90s, I want to say, when individual album sales were tracked more clearly as opposed to how many of a given record was actually shipped. I don't know what that was originally based on, if that was demand reported from record stores, what they thought they would sell. So that changed at some point before the turn of the millennium. And also, sometimes what was on the Hot 100 or whatever else was a combination of, anecdotal requests for radio play, MTV spins, actual physical sales or singles that were shipped. And those could be fudged anywhere or another. I used to work for a Blockbuster I used to work for a Blockbuster music store, which was owned by Viacom and Blockbuster, but it had its own brick and mortar stores. It was, until they started suffering, was not inside the Blockbuster video store. It had its own. Like where I grew up in Lombard outside of Chicago, ours was a former Sound Warehouse location. Blockbuster, I think, acquired all the Sound Warehouses. And less than a quarter mile, there was the actual Blockbuster video store. Now, we had a top 20 wall, top 20 albums. It changed every week, and it was never actually told to us how they sourced these top 20s. You would have assumed that it was the best-selling albums at Blockbuster locations or even a specific store. No, it turned out, so we changed the top 20 every Monday night because new albums were released on Tuesday, and that was just Tuesday was kind of the day where things were posted in the industry, whatever. Not interesting. But one week we started putting the wall together, and number one was blank. And I was, asking our boss, what's the deal? What's the number one spot? It's obviously not 2 through 20 here. And I said, oh, it's for the Dog Pound album. Thinking back on that makes me laugh. Which was being released that Tuesday, which means it hadn't sold any records yet. So maybe it was forecasted demand, maybe it was a little record company money paying for an advertising slot inside Blockbuster, but I was 16 at the point, and my mind went, poof, this is all rigged, So then again, fast forward to today, and a lot of the charts are based on streaming data, which is very real, hard data that has never been available before. I mean, it used to be, if the Hot 100 list was compiled because of how many, radio requests or how many physical copies of a single were sold, once you bought that one copy, that got one tick, and then on to the next purchase or transaction, whatever. But with streaming, with Spotify and Apple Music and Pandora, and is Tidal still around? I don't know. They know exactly how many times, once you bring that record home, how many times you play it, which is astounding. Now, do they count individual user listens as, if I listen to it 40 times, does that count for 40 spins for Olivia Rodrigo? Not 100% sure. However, it then skews sort of how the nation listens to music if you've got people who only listen to like a couple artists or are super obsessed with Taylor Swift or Drake, as what happens when they release their albums, and the entire top 10 is the songs from that album. I remember I was reading Reddit when Spotify Wrapped came out. I don't think it was this last year, but maybe in 2023. And some guy on Reddit was like, yeah, I'm one of Young Thug's top 0.01% listeners, because all he listened to was Young Thug, and he hit it on like 24 hours a day. So it's not a gauge of real popularity, is it? It's, at least as far as, one person, one vote would go in an election of some sort. And so, coupled with the reasons they gave in the video, why are bands no longer as popular? Well, it's easier to market a solo artist, probably true. Easier to record as a solo artist because you're not competing with so many voices, probably true. Easier for a brought-in songwriter by a record company to work with a given artist, easier than working with 4 members of a band. All these things are plainly influential in this sort of thing. And along with that, the fact that most groups are rock-oriented or guitar-based, and that sort of music is on the way out, that's definitely a factor too. Now, it's really tempting to draw jazz into this, and it's often a kind of a red herring when it comes to explaining the demise of rock and roll, what's happening, because jazz artists always kind of went as solo artists on each other's records, right? You didn't have too many groups. I mean, you had the Mahavishnu Orchestra, things like that, but the Miles Davis Quintet often had the 4 band members' names, the 4 other band members' names on the album cover. So it's nothing new, really, that people do more as solo artists and featuring. It wasn't rock tradition for a long time, but things change. Things have always changed in rock and roll, or other bands for that instance. And it's another thing about the charts and how things are tabulated is if, okay, you say, oh, there's been no songs by bands that have hit the top of the top 100 this year. It's like, well, okay, it's late September. Do you know how many songs have topped the charts this year? 11. One of them from the first week of the year was a Christmas song. In 2023, I believe, unless I miscounted, it's either 15 or 16 songs topped the charts all year long. And at the end of the year, at least 3 weeks of those were Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You. Of course, now we can get into things like, well, what does this mean for the future of pop music? I don't know. I mean, I live outside of Chicago. The concert calendar is full of bands yearly, and they seem to do pretty well. So whether or not that translates into radio listens and requests to radio stations and streaming, I can't really say. And the fact that these shows sell well speaks to maybe more of a relevance of band-based music as more of a live attraction than something sitting and listening to on headphones. And that's the way a whole lot of us consume our music nowadays, is on headphones. We don't sit in a room and crank a stereo much anymore. A lot of people commute to work with their AirPods in. I mean, they barely even listen to the radio. Is this a good or a bad thing? Well, I don't know about a good thing. I honestly think things are so cyclical that it may just swing back around anyway, and that people will get so tired of differentiating so many solo artists that bands will come back into fashion just as a different means of promoting oneself. Or perhaps one of the reasons we see fewer groups on the charts is that, and more solo artists, is that maybe we're just out of names. I mean, or at least good names. Is it a bad thing? I don't think so either. There are still kids who play in bands. There are still kids who join jazz orchestras. There are still kids who join classical orchestras. I know music should have a very communal aspect to it, but often that comes in the form of dancing, and band music, more often than not, is not dance music, at least not the way people dance today. So anyway, if you want bands, don't fret, don't run to the grocery store and buy up all the paper towels like we did during the pandemic. There's still plenty to go around. In fact, there's a lot for you to go around because not as many people are listening to them anymore. That's kind of mean, but there's no alarm. It's just change, and change is good. All right? We'll see you around. Check my Instagram page for more bands. Bye.